Hello, I'm Jeff, and welcome to Snap Talk, where we talk about things that either may not make the podcast or run out of time and can't quite get all our thoughts on it. Well, as of early June, Indieformer is no more. At least when it comes to indie game awareness. The channel is leaving the industry for more movie-based stuff, as neither have been playing games recently, sort of losing the passion for the industry. This is quite a shame for myself as well as others that were hoping for a little help navigating the deluge of titles coming from Steam. Obviously, you always hope that the cream will rise to the top, but that isn't always the case. So I was glad to see that someone picked up the mantle of indie awareness on the world's largest video platform for the world's best-known PC gaming platform. The channel is Get Indie Gaming, and the presenter seems to be finding his rhythm in presenting the new games. However, it definitely didn't start smoothly. Back in January, in his first attempt at talking about the best-looking indie games for the month, there were three names that caught my eye as being misplaced. These were Kingdom Hearts HD 2.8, Tales of Berseria, and Gravity Rush 2. Kingdom Hearts, created in-house by Square Enix, and Tales of Berseria, created by Bandai Namco Studios, were merely featured as honorable mentions. Gravity Rush 2, created by Sony's Japan studio, was in the top 5. Neither of these are indie games. Now, back at the old site, when we did our first year of awards, we were trying to come up with guidelines for what we would classify as an indie game, because we really wanted an indie category. Unfortunately, we never quite got around to figuring out what the guidelines were, and so we ended up going with a catch-all downloadable category, which didn't quite work out as planned. The first 2 years of the category were dominated by major titles, with Telltale's The Walking Dead and Capcom's Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Dual Destinies winning. Not exactly what I was hoping for in trying to give a push to indie games. Now, with coming across Get Indie Gaming and his comment about coming up with his own rules of what he would consider indie as he goes along, I started thinking about what I would consider an independently developed game. So this is a quick list of what I would consider criteria for being an indie game. The first one is the team has to be separate from major publishers. Although I will say that it is okay for them to accept financial help from them. For instance, we go back to our buddy Kingdom Hearts. Obviously, that is not an indie game. It is a major franchise created by the larger Square Enix. Now, you look at something like the Square Enix Collective, which was their attempt to help out smaller developers, and you look at things like Moon Hunters or the recently released Children of Zodiacs, and those are games that are created by teams separate from Square Enix, but they also received some help from the larger company. In that case, that would be what I would consider acceptable for a smaller team accepting help from a bigger publisher and still being considered an indie. It's not much more different than these smaller teams trying to raise funds via Kickstarter or Fig. And it also brings us into the next one. The team that creates the game should be smaller than that of a larger AAA game or a AA, single A, whatever you want to call something that's not quite Call of Duty, or I guess whatever the main Fire Emblem game is, or what top 3DS games are. And there also has to be a question of what exactly is the lineage of the developer of the game. For instance, if you have a long history of success in creating games at a high level, I wouldn't necessarily consider you an indie. For instance, a team like Harebrained Schemes, creator of Shadowrun Returns, as well as that game's sequels, is successful in creating a number of games, but they do it with a number of crowdfunding campaigns, and the games they create wouldn't necessarily be on the high end of anything. Well, except maybe ratings. Meanwhile, a company like Square Enix may have started as a small company, or two companies in this case, but has created games at the highest levels for decades, keeping up with high-end audio and visual fidelity. Now, it can be difficult to figure out where long-running companies like Double Fine Productions or an Exile Entertainment fall into, but I would err on the side of caution and consider them high-level indie. They've been successful for over a decade, but don't necessarily go for broke when it comes to fidelity. And then one that's kind of my own personal addition to it. It seems like one that not everyone would add in, but there has to be a level of competency in the development of the game. Now, I realize not all indie games are the same. Not all indie games are going to be these beautiful works of art, but there needs to be competence in how it's developed. It needs to be something that looks like it was done by someone who knows how to program. It needs to be something that sounds like someone who knows how to do sound effects or create music. It can't just be someone who just flips assets. I mean, if you're just going to be someone who's an asset flipper, I'm not going to call you an indie developer. I'm just going to call you at what you are, an asset flipper. So where exactly does that leave indie gaming? Well, I think that they're understanding what an indie game is, and I think most of what they're presenting falls within those categories that I presented. But I would say that I do find it odd that they list games based on best looking rather than what is just the best. I mean, if you look at the top 5 lists they bring out, it's usually at the beginning of the month, and it seems like it's based mostly on what is the best looking game. We all know that if it came down to what is the best looking game, some of the games that have been coming out would have no chance at being successful. Now, I know there's some of you are probably going to ask, well, why don't you go to a site that covers a lot of indie stuff? Well, it's not just that those sites cover indie stuff, it's also they cover other things, and there's only so much that a single site can do. So even when they do cover it, it's only a little bit at a time. And even YouTube channels that'll cover some indie games, they'll only do a little bit. For instance, you got ACG, Angry Centaur Gaming, who they'll do a few indie titles, but they'll be mixed in with some of the other AAA titles. Same thing for someone like Yahtzee for Zero Punctuation over at Escapist channel. And with the Indieformer guys seemingly hitting a breaking point and all this, it makes me wonder how long someone like No More Shadows over at Get Indie Gaming would be able to keep this up. So that leaves me with a question. Would it be possible for those of us here on YouTube that like to play indie games to come together and form a sort of indie collective? Basically, instead of having one or two people do the job, it would be spread out to many, hopefully stopping any burnout guys like No More Shadows could get from doing this. Hard to start up? Maybe. Possibly unnecessary? Perhaps. I'm reminded of a vlog Total Biscuit did a couple years ago about indie games not selling well on Steam. One of the key points he made was how it's not the responsibility of the media to sell a game. That responsibility lies with the developer and publisher. And while I agree with that sentiment, it wouldn't necessarily hurt to give a game a push. And in case Get Indie Gaming or any other indie-focused channel is listening, feel free to steal this idea if you want, assuming you already don't do said idea. And that is it for this episode of Snap Talk. If you liked what you saw, please like, comment, subscribe, and share with others. If you have a different opinion on what was stated, feel free to comment down below and we can talk about it. If you have an idea for another Snap Talk, leave a suggestion below, and if I feel I can get enough material together, I may talk about it in a future episode. Featured game today is one of 2017's indie darlings, Hollow Knight. It is a Metroidvania-style game from Aussie developer Team Cherry. The game features an amazing aesthetic with a handcrafted art style that feels like something straight out of old animated movies. Gameplay mixes in some Dark Soul elements with losing all your geos, the game's currency, as well as a third of your possible soul collecting ability until you reclaim your shade. The soundtrack of Christopher Larkin is equal parts haunting and beautiful. And for those that will poo-poo the engine, it's made in Unity. Obviously a big plus for them. Easily my favorite indie game so far this year. It's currently available on GOG.com and Steam, and will soon find itself on the Nintendo Switch. A free content pack called Hidden Dreams will be coming in early August. I'm Jeff from Some Nerdy Arguments, and I'll talk to you soon.